Really great pleasure to share some time with you today. We published a report on Lithuania today that showed amazing progress the country has done over the last 15 years in giving more people access to better education, from early childhood education up to university. But you know, the world is changing very, very fast. And what was good for yesterday may not be good for tomorrow. And in fact, Lithuania is surrounded by education systems, some of which do a lot better. So I think that's the test that we have to look at. And we track educational performance every 3 years through our PISA assessment, where we look at the knowledge and skills of 15-year-old students. The last time we did this was in 2015, and we focused on science. But it was not the first time that we did it. In fact, the first time was in 2006. 2006 is a long, long time ago for many of us. In fact, you know, it was the year before the iPhone was invented. Imagine that. We didn't have the kind of technologies we take for granted today. Twitter was still a sound. The Amazon was still a river. Many of the kind of technologies that have framed our life today did not exist by then. But you look at learning outcomes. Across the OECD, they have remained pretty flat. Students have learned more content, but when you test the capacity to think like a scientist, or think like a mathematician, or think like a philosopher, the world hasn't changed. And the world didn't stop in 2009. You know, maps became dynamic, cars became electric, now they drive without a driver. And actually, we still see again, you know, very little progress in education. In the last 3 years, have, you know, seen amazing technological developments. Think about, you know, biogenetics, cloud computing, all those kinds of developments that, you know, have changed the world around us. And in learning outcomes, no change. That is the challenge of our time. I'm not saying that education is not improving. Students learn more things. But the kind of things that matter for your success in tomorrow's world, the capacity to think creatively, solve complex problems, imagine new answers to today's and tomorrow's problems. That's not something where we see improvement. Of course, you know, there are some countries that have really seen real change. You know, Portugal is a country that started out from very low, and, you know, step by step has been able to progress to better learning outcomes. Or you can see Singapore. Some countries at the top continue to improve. It's a very important message as well. High-performing systems don't stand still and wait for everybody else to catch up. They continue to improve as well. And then you look at Lithuania, you can see actually pretty constant outcomes. Even in last year's slight decline. I'm showing you the worst area, and if I show you the picture in math and reading, it's sort of not like this. But still, we haven't seen the kind of improvements that our societies need. The demands for better education are moving much, much faster than changes in education. So what I want to do today is look with you at some of the factors that we have found to be related to success in education. Before I do that, I want to sort of contextualize the quality of education, which you find on the vertical axis, with equity in education opportunities on the horizontal axis. And nobody likes to be here where, you know, learning outcomes are poor and large social disparities. Everybody wants to be in this upper right corner where you can see performances really good and all students from all social backgrounds succeed. In a way, you can see Lithuania is a little bit in that kind of corner, sort of on equity. The country has done really well, despite the fact that, you know, income is not really equally distributed in Lithuania, despite the large urban-rural gap that you see in this country. Still, the new system delivers quite equitable quality. The challenge is to move, you know, right upwards, where you find Estonia or other countries that reconcile quality and equity in a more effective way. So I'm not going to look just at this axis. I'm going to also look in my presentation at that axis, you know, reconciling fairness with quality. You know, some people say, well, this is all about social context, culture, and all of those kinds of things. It's a typical argument that is made when we compare education systems. Well, you compare apples with oranges. That's not really appropriate. Well, let's compare apples with apples and oranges with oranges. What I show you here is the performance distribution by decile of social background. So here you can see the poorest children in the Dominican Republic. They don't do very well. These are the wealthiest children in the Dominican Republic. They do much better. You look at this huge social gap, and you may conclude, well, poverty is destiny. You just see that social disadvantage is a huge barrier to educational progress. But you look at this across countries, and you can see similar children do so differently depending on where they go to school. Look at this. The 10% of the most disadvantaged children internationally in Vietnam, or Estonia, they do as well as the average child in Lithuania. And they do better than the 10% wealthiest children in much of Latin America. The conclusion, poverty is not destiny. It matters a lot more where you go to school than where you come from. The education system has a huge impact on leveraging talent of disadvantaged children. Similar children perform very, very differently depending on the country in which they go to school. That should put a lot of pressure on all of us to not use social background as an easy kind of apology for not doing well, but to think about what can education do to leverage the talent of all children. This is another way of looking at it. I talk very well about countries like Vietnam or Korea or Japan or China or Germany that do really well in terms of PISA learning outcomes in science. But when we ask children, you want to become a scientist? They say no. And then you look at the United States. It doesn't come well out on PISA, but everybody wants to become a scientist. So you look at this chart and you ask yourself, yeah, well, maybe we have to make a choice. No? Either we educate children well, or they want to become a scientist. But actually, Lithuania is somewhere in the middle. It's not doing so well in leveraging learning outcomes, but it's doing quite well in raising student aspirations. So we have to make a choice. Well, actually the PISA results show differently. I'm going to show you in the red circle the countries that do well. In the purple one, the students that believe in science as a method of social inquiry. Do I believe that the world can be improved through science? And in the blue, the people who want to become scientists. So the question was, can we get into the middle of the circle? Can we get everything right? If this middle is empty, we have to make choices. But actually it's not empty. You can look at Singapore or Canada. Actually Slovenia is doing well. At the lower level, Australia, UK, Ireland, Portugal. Those countries do succeed with reconciling cognitive, social, and emotional outcomes. Very good, very important example. Then you have some countries, that are good in 2 of those dimensions, and a whole list of countries that have succeeded academically, but not in engaging young people in those kinds of aspirations. And that's crucial. If you do well at a school test in school, but you don't want you do not see the life opportunities that learning offers for you, it's not going to be of much value. Or you take countries like the United States, Spain, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, you can see students believe in science, they want to become scientists, but school is not preparing them for that. It's also not enough. And then, of course, you have countries in the rest. So, first question is, what gets you into the middle? And I'll show you part of the answer here. If you do not enjoy science learning, better learning outcomes on the horizontal axis translate only marginally into better aspirations. So actually it shows you if you don't enjoy science, doing really well in school doesn't make much of a difference for the choices you make later in life. If you enjoy science, that relationship becomes much more important. It's an example for how we need to pay attention to social, emotional outcomes of learning. Getting teachers, who have a passion for science and who can convey that passion to their students are going to be much more effective, not only in giving students better knowledge, but also in sort of getting students attracted to using the subject, to opening life opportunities. There's a huge gender effect in this. It's quite amazing. You look at Lithuania, there's almost no difference in the math and science scores between boys and girls. Girls and boys are equally well in science. But when you ask students, is science going to open life opportunities for you? It's a huge gender gap. Those are the issues we need to take to heart, and they actually make a real difference. What you can see good for Lithuania is that there's actually been an improvement in enjoyment of science. It's still not very good, but actually the system has moved into the right direction between 2006 and 2015. Learning has become more interesting and engaging. And this is not surprising. We have actually experimented with very interesting pedagogical models here, project-based learning. Those things didn't exist in 2006. They're still not very dominant, but they're becoming more important, and you can see that reflected in this. But the question of today was, what lies behind the successes? And I want to actually paint those things upwards in terms of the difference they make on outcomes. But as always in life, you have to keep in mind the kind of political and economic cost of change. Everybody wants to do things that are easy to do and very important. No? That's how we're at. No? Nobody wants to put money into things that are maybe not so important and not so effective. But don't take that too easily. Actually, a lot of money in education is going into things where you can question effectiveness. I'll give you an example. When high-performing countries have to make the choice between, investing in their teachers and investing in smaller classes, most high-performing education systems prioritize the quality of teaching over the size of classes. But you have many other countries that have gone the other way around. So this is non-trivial at all. But let's also talk about some things that are really difficult to do and very important, like raising the quality of teaching, creating a more collaborative profession, creating a profession that owns its professional practice. And those things are really hard to do, but very important. And then I'm going to pick up some low-hanging fruits, things that are easy to do, but maybe not so important. So, this is what we found. I'm going to walk you through these points step by step. I'm going to start with something that, looks trivial, but is very important, and that's the commitment to universal achievement. And I'm not talking about, the president giving a great speech about how important education is. I'm talking about, the growth mindset that we find among students and teachers. We ask students in 2012 a simple question, what do you believe makes you successful in mathematics? And you can see a majority of students in Lithuania who said, oh, that's very easy, talent. If I'm not born as a genius, I'm going to study something else. If you ask that same question to a student in Singapore or in China, 9 out of 10 students say, if I study really, really hard, I know my teacher is going to help me and I will be successful. They own their success and they take whatever it does to get there. And they trust their teachers to bring them on board. They don't think that education is just sorting them. Very important, this commitment to education, and also the belief that every child can learn. That's a non-trivial thing. Do we really believe that every child is capable to learn? Well, the PISA results show that. You go to high-performing systems, actually every child can do well in mathematics. Most people just don't believe it, but it's actually what the data show. And actually, Lithuania is an example where, this belief in your own abilities makes even more of a difference in student learning outcomes than on average across OECD countries. That is what the growth mindset is about. Do I believe in my possibilities? And that very much has to do with the signals that my teachers give me. I give you an example. In Lithuania, students from disadvantaged backgrounds get better school marks from their teachers, despite the fact that they don't have better outcomes. You take 2 students with the same PISA score, the more disadvantaged students get a better school mark than the wealthier student. Now you might think, well, that's great for the disadvantaged students, they get a better school marks, they have a better chance in life, but actually it works exactly the other way around. Basically what it means, we lower expectations for students from disadvantage. Same for gender. Take a boy and a girl with the same PISA score, the girls systematically get better marks than the boys. is actually very bad for the girls, because it again signals, well, the teacher may think, oh, well, this girl gets much better outcome than I expected, I'm going to give her a good mark. But it's not good for the future of that person. So those things matter in Lithuania more than elsewhere. Investing resources where they make most of the difference. On the one hand, you can see actually spending money works only up to a point. You know, Lithuania is still a country that invests very little in education per student. You know that. But actually, soon you're going to get, and it's improving, but soon you're going to get to a point where actually just more money alone is not going to go the trick. Soon you get to a point where you have to think much harder about the kind of spending choices that you make. If you get €1 more, are you going to spend it on paying your teachers better? Would be a great thing to do. Or are you going to spend it on giving students more time for learning? Would be a great thing to do. Are you going to spend it on making your classes smaller or giving teachers more time for other things than teaching? All of those things are wonderful things. But you have to soon make choices between them. And that's the hard part. Basically what you can see from there is, money alone gets you only that far. Aligning money with resources is much more important. Actually, I credit Lithuania for that. You are among the very few countries in the green part. What this green part suggests is that you give more money to students in greater need. And that's one of the defining characteristics of a high-performing education. If you come from a wealthy background, you are going to have many chances in life. And actually, schooling matters a lot less for you than you think in terms of success in life. If you come from a disadvantaged background, you have only one card to play in your life, and that is a good education. You miss that boat, you're not going to get a second chance. At least the majority of children don't. Most of the things that happen to you later in life, including higher education, tend to reinforce, not moderate, early disparities. So Lithuania is doing well. Most other countries are deep in the red, in the sense that if you come from a disadvantaged background, we're also going to give you the less qualified teacher and the fewer educational resources and so on. Very, very important for success. Some countries do that more systematically than Lithuania, particularly the East Asian countries. They are systematically pairing high and low performing schools, sharing experiences among high and low performing schools, making it attractive for teachers to go into rural schools, disadvantaged schools. If you're a vice principal in one of the most successful schools in Shanghai, in China, and you want to become a principal, the system will tell you, it's a great aspiration, but first help us turn around a low-performing school. You show that you can make a difference where we need you most, and then you're going to get the kind of post. Teachers, the same thing. In Lithuania, you get more money when you become older. The whole teaching career is basically modeled around your age. In Shanghai, in China, if you want to become a better teacher, get more salary, get more prestige, well, you have to actually be able to work in the most disadvantaged communities. This is why, those disadvantaged communities have the longest lists of applicants. Everybody wants to work there. Not so much about money, it's about, occupational prestige, about careers and so on, so that's very important. Starting strong, also this is an area, Lithuania has seen amazing progress in making early childhood education close to universal. But look at this. If you come from a kind of privileged context, you have basically more than 3.5 years of early childhood education. You're going to get a great start in your life. But if you come from a disadvantaged context, less than school years. If you grow up in a rural community in Lithuania, you're going to have actually very kind of limited access to the kind of preparation that gets you ready for school. It's a good illustration, On average, things look good. But once you drill down, there are important issues to address. And this gap is one of the largest among countries. I think in that area, really to work. Let me come to the hardest part of the agenda, capacity at the point of delivery. How do you attract great people into teaching? And again, it's easy to make teaching financially more attractive. And Lithuania could do a lot better with this, paying its teachers properly. But it's much harder to make teaching intellectually attractive. Let's have a look at some of those kinds of factors in there. The first is, what I call the productivity puzzle. I know in Lithuania, there's a lot of discussion now to increase learning time for students. And I think it's a good first step, giving students more time for learning. Most other countries have done it. In Lithuania, students start late in school, and then they get fewer hours of instruction. That's limiting access. Why do I say this? Because in every country, time is an important predictor for student success. You add 1 more hour of mathematics instruction, you're going to get better math outcomes. You add 1 more hour of science instruction, you're going to get better outcomes. Time is a very reliable predictor for outcomes. But look at this. If I do that across countries, you see that the more time you spend in schooling, the worse you come out in PISA. Think about this. I just told you how important time is. And now I'm telling you, actually, time makes things worse. But the simple answer to this is that the quality of learning outcomes is always the product of the quantity of learning and the quality of teaching. Yes, you can improve learning outcomes by adding more time. That's what Lithuania is doing, and I think it's a good thing to do. But in the long run, you need to work harder to improve the quality of learning. Let me just show you this with an example. This is the learning time in school, and you can see the bar is very, very short in Lithuania. Students have less exposure to time than other students. This is the time students spend out of school learning. It's also not very long. Huge differences across countries. You go to the UAE, students spend close to 60 hours learning per week. No adult would be allowed to work that much. And actually, or China, 58 hours. Huge amount of volume of learning. You compare that with Finland, 36 hours. Very short school days. But the trick is when you look at learning outcomes per hour of instruction, in Finland, they spend little time and learn a lot, or Germany, or Switzerland, or Japan, or Estonia. But you go to the UAE, you spend a lot of time and learn very little. So this really shows that time is necessary, but actually ultimately it's about the quality of learning outcomes. The quality of instruction as a system. No education system can be better than the quality of teaching. This is about developing teaching as a profession, recruiting great people into the profession, making sure that they get the right level of support, making sure that we retain great talent in the system. And finally, improving the societal view of teaching as a profession. That has a huge impact on people's decision to become teachers. How does society look at my job? Do they see this as a kind of factory worker? Anybody can go into teaching. They just deliver a prefabricated schoolwork. Or do I see this as a profession where people do amazing work and work with children and things like this? And actually, I don't have data for Lithuania on this, but there are huge differences. If you go to Malaysia, to Singapore, to Korea, to UAE, to Finland, you can actually see that most teachers see their status in society very, very high. If you go, my children go to school in France, only 5 in 100 teachers see their state with their work valued by society. You can ask yourself, well, why do we care? It's just the view of teachers on the status of their profession. But actually, those things line pretty well up with the performance of the education system. In most countries that do well on PISA, teaching is a revered profession. Now, the causal nature of that relationship, we don't know. Maybe when teachers do a great job, society will pay them respect. It's one interpretation. It could also be that, where actually teaching is a revered profession, it attracts great people, and they end up doing a great job. We do not know the causal nature, but the relationship is clear. The view of society on teaching is a very important variable that we need to look at. But we also need to pay more attention to professionalism, and getting away from the kind of prescriptive education systems where they tell people in great detail what they need to do. Look at Lithuania. You take your school curriculum, 1,500 pages. If you put all of this together, you can cover all of the walls with that here. You go to Finland, a few thousand kilometers, and you find 40 pages. very different mindset about the level of prescription. One has to do with a really professional environment where we trust people in the front line to think about, what do I teach to my students today, tomorrow, as opposed to giving them prescription. Unfortunately, I don't have data for Lithuania, but what we think is behind teacher professionalism is three things. First, of course, do teachers really know what they teach, and do they know a lot about the people who they teach? It's about pedagogical knowledge, it's about professional knowledge, it's about academic knowledge. But there's one thing else, and that's professional autonomy. To what extent do teachers really own their professional practice? And there's a third element, and that's a collaborative culture. Do teachers actually work with other teachers to frame the practice? And there are huge differences in the extent to which they set them across different countries. Let me start with a country in your neighborhood, Poland. The triangle is really very bright. Poland has made huge investments in raising the quality of its teaching profession over the last 10 years. I think actually it's one of the most amazing success stories in Europe, raising teacher professionals. You look at Portugal, still need a lot of work to make this triangle larger. But those are the simple cases. You can say great and not so great. There are more interesting ones. You take Malaysia, for example. They're very, very strong on the collaborative culture. That's true for almost all East Asian systems, or Asian systems. They put a lot of emphasis to give people opportunities to work together. But, they're not doing well in Malaysia on professional autonomy. No, teachers don't have so much discretion over their work, and they're also not so well prepared as a teacher. So the result is not that great. You take here Italy. No? Teachers can do what they like. No? Professional autonomy is very, very good, but actually the collaborative culture is not so great. And also professional knowledge is not so great. And this is where you start to get surprised. For those of us who know Italians, they are very social people, they're easy to collaborate with, but they don't do that in school. So this doesn't depend so much on the people, it depends very much on the work organization that we create in school. What are the incentives and what is the support for people to engage in real professional collaboration? You take France, where my children go to school, good in knowledge, teachers are really well prepared, but not so great on professional autonomy and quite weak on the collaborative culture. Why do I show you this? This is what policy and practice is about. This is not about the people who teach. This is very much to do with the work organization that we create in school to help people to become good professionals. It's a good thing because it also shows we can change those things. If we change the work organization, the profession is going to change. And you can actually see when this is always what we do at the OECD, you can rank countries on that, and you can actually see their big difference. Imagine you could combine the kind of high degree of professional autonomy in a country like Estonia with a strong collaborative culture of the Chinese. You do that in Lithuania, you get the world's best education system. Countries drive their kind of comparative professionalism out of different sources, and this is, I think, a good illustration. There are different components in different countries. Let's take professional collaboration as an example. When it comes to superficial collaboration, discussing student results, sharing resources, teachers are very social people. Those things happen in schools, but they don't make much difference in terms of learning outcomes. The deeper kind of professional collaboration, team teaching, collaborative professional development, joint activities, classroom observation. These are the most important things to drive professionalism. And you can actually see we don't do those things very much. There are some exceptions. I mentioned already, if you are a teacher in China, you'd observe somebody else's classroom once per week. You do a teaching competition once per month. You permanently, or Singapore, you spend 100 hours every year in professional learning communities and going back to the National Institute of Education. There are countries which have a very, very different work organization, but they are the exceptions. In the majority of countries, those things do not happen. We still have, teachers working in isolation, behind closed doors, trying to solve difficult challenges, and that's not what a profession really is working about. There's a lot we can learn from countries around the world. Why do I say this? Because the more teachers teach jointly, the more they observe other teachers' classes, the more they engage in joint activities, the more they take part in collaborative learning. That is what drives self-efficacy of teachers. It, by the way, also drives job satisfaction. It's a really, really interesting point. We could find no relationship between whether teachers are happy in their job and how large the class is or how much time they spend. The big drivers of teacher job satisfaction and self-efficacy have to do with the work organization, the collaborative nature of the job. And then you're going to hear from Ireland about the teacher councils. These are actually professional bodies, not created by government, but created by the profession to actually define own standard, share standard. Those things are really, really important examples for creating what we think is a profession. Let me show you an example for how this actually works. On the vertical axis, I show you the student-staff ratio, how generous is a country in providing lots of teachers for every 100 students. And you can see very few countries are more generous than Lithuania. Lithuania has a very, very large teaching force and a very small student. But on the horizontal axis, I show you the size of a class. And now you might think, well, the two things should be the same thing. If I have more teachers, I can make my classes smaller. But you can see there is no relationship between those two things. You compare, China at the extreme. They are also very generous with their teacher supply, but they're very large classes. And you ask yourself, how can this go on? Why do the Chinese have lots of teachers and still the classes are very large? The answer is that they have a very different vision of what a teacher is supposed to do. If you're a teacher in Shanghai, in China, you teach between 11 and 16 hours per week. Actually, very limited teaching. But you work more than a teacher in Lithuania. Working hours are very hard. What do you do in the rest of your time? Well, you spend a lot of your time working with colleagues, so define good practice, evaluate good practice, review lesson plans, and so on. You spend a lot of time working with individual students. You spend a lot of time working with parents. I once met a teacher in a rural community in the surroundings of China and asked her, how do you actually reach out to parents, bring parents on board of this mission? Because the parents did not have any education on their own. And she said to me, well, I call every parent about twice per week, and to talk with them about parenting, about education, teaching, and so on. And I said to her, wow, there must be a huge workload for you. How do you manage this? Getting twice per week calling out every parent. And she said to me, well, I never thought about it like this. If I wouldn't spend that time with the parents, if I wouldn't have all of these parents supporting my work, I couldn't do my job. For them, it was just one of many investments they make in society, so actually with a huge payback for improving education. Very different philosophy of what the role of a teacher is. And that's actually quite typical. Many people ask, why are the East Asian countries so successful in education? Because they typically have teachers which are not expected to only teach academic school subjects in the classroom, but they take a much more holistic approach to the well-being of students. They spend more time with parents, more time with individual students, more time with other teachers, around many things, of which academic learning is only one. Again, two countries investing similar amounts of resources, but investing them very differently. That's the point I really want to make, and it has a huge impact on the quality and equity in learning outcomes. Curriculum, I want to just talk about this very, very briefly, but there are some really interesting findings in the PISA outcomes. If you think about the world of tomorrow, what we actually see is that the kind of things that are easy to teach and easy to test, routine cognitive content, is actually losing most rapidly in value on the labor market, particularly in the 90s. Why is this happening? And actually what's rising in importance is non-routine analytic skills, your capacity to think creatively, imaginatively, solve complex problems, precisely the kind of things that we look at in PISA, and social skills. It's also interesting. The skill category that has seen the biggest improvement in value on the labor market is not on the cognitive part, but it's about the capacity of people to collaborate, to compete, to connect. And you think about this, we still haven't got that message in school systems. We say how important collaborative learning is, but we teach students individually. And at the end of the school year, we give them an individual test. So we actually ignore those collaborative skills even though we proclaim them to be important. Very important to keep in mind. Why is this happening? Well, we know, robots are taking over all factories. You see that everywhere. And augmented reality can bring the world's most advanced knowledge right into what we do now. You can look up things in Google at any time, and that means the world no longer rewards people just for what they know. Google knows everything. The world rewards people for what they can do with what they know. That's becoming the big differentiator. And education hasn't really got that message yet, and that's very important. So we need to think harder about the kind of knowledge, the content knowledge, but also the epistemic knowledge. PISA tests content knowledge, but puts much greater emphasis on epistemic understanding. Can you think like a scientist? Can you think like a mathematician? Why do we do this? Because those are the enduring features of learning. The content changes every day. But if you do not master the fundamentals of a discipline, if you cannot think like an historian, remembering all the names of the kings and queens, it's not going to help you. So that's the point. Getting epistemic, looking at skills, how we use what we know, and also character. An increasingly complex, volatile world. Success in schooling is not just about what you learn, but also you have the kind of compass and navigation skills to find your own way. Keep learning, growing in your. So look at this. The world of knowledge is expanding dramatically, exponentially we can say, and it is all those kinds of facets that make this world beautiful. And the different fields of knowledge are always combined with people. That's very, very important. Knowledge does not exist in isolation and should never be taught in isolation. It's always contextualized. And the world of the curriculum is so small, this little box. And of course you try to get everything into this little box. That's how you got to your 1,500 pages in this thing. Everybody wants to have everything in there. But what happens is the moment you do that, what ends up in the box typically is a very shallow shadow of the full richness of the world. Take Lithuanian fourth graders. They're enthusiastic about science, experimenting, observing the world, seeing, and making things. You look at them at the PISA age and at 15, these people hate science. And we have somehow lost the kind of energy of students to see the kind of rich world in this kind of curriculum, because we have made learning often a misery in school. And the reaction is that we put more and more things into this box. And again, as I said, you end up with a system that is often a mile wide and just an inch deep. That's the challenge of our times, and we lose the kind of things that actually, make learning successful, the realm of human knowledge, ethics, political and civic life, creativity, design, and so this is something that I think we need to think hard about when we think about tomorrow's school curriculum. These are going to be the things that make people different from machines. If you just focus on the reproduction of subject matter content, you're going to end up with students who are almost as smart as a smartphone, because you can do all of those things in the digital world. If you want to actually pair the artificial intelligence of computers with the human qualities to actually have people leveraging technology, those are the things that are really going to matter. So let me show you a little bit of data on this. And first of all, what are the challenges for doing this? First, it has to do with rigor. That is about cognitive demand. That's one of the best predictors on PISA for learning outcomes. Second, it has to do with focus, teaching few things at great depth. That's the one secret that high-performing countries have pursued. And that's the most difficult thing to do. In the 90s, Japan reduced the curriculum by 30%. And you had the parents against you because they said, well, my child no longer learns what I learned. The school system must have declined. You had teachers against you because teachers said, well, in the past it was so easy. I just follow all the pages of the school book and I've done my job. Now you ask me to find out, what I need to teach. But at the end of the day, Japan was a country that saw the biggest increase on PISA, on creative thinking, on the capacity of students to solve open-ended tasks. Hard to do, very important. And coherence, this is about meaningful learning progression. There's a lot, that we need to think much harder about. Brain research shows us that many of the things that we do in schooling make no sense. If you try to teach someone a foreign language and you start to do that in secondary school, you teach them on Monday one lesson and on Thursday one lesson, you can be sure that they will not learn anything. And actually brain research shows you why. Still, that's the way we operate, because it's so much easier to get foreign language qualified teachers in a high school than in primary school. If you would teach, English in a sports class, you'd get much better effect than teaching English in an English class. We know that, but we don't do that. So this is about coherence, meaningful learning progressions. It's about remaining true to the disciplines, teaching people to understand the foundations of the disciplines, and at the same time encourage interdisciplinary learning. It's not about, some people talk about cross-curricular learning, mangling up everything in a kind of wonderful project. It's not what I'm talking about. It's about actually having a teacher who's really a good mathematician, and a good philosopher, and a good scientist, and having people learning to look at problems through different disciplinary lenses. That's what this is really about. It's about focusing on areas with the highest transfer value. Thinking about what do I need to teach that enables students to actually extrapolate from what they know. It's about learning that is thematic, it's problem-based, project-based. Those are the things. And then, the hardest part is that some things are better caught than taught, particularly when it comes to character qualities. You don't teach empathy by, teaching a subject. You demonstrate it. You don't teach courage. You don't teach leadership. And there's much more creative ways in which we can think about it. For example, if you think about sports, sports can be about athletics and so on, of course. But sports is an amazing subject to teach people, courage, taking responsibility for yourself, taking responsibility for others, all those kinds of social qualities that are really important. So that's really what is important. Let me just highlight this. Memorization is the oldest learning strategy. You have people to learn something and you expect them to repeat that and to be successful in life. In some countries it's very common. Lithuania is actually among the countries where this is not very dominant in learning at age 15. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Actually, you can look at this in an interesting way. In the green area, I'm going to show you the PISA tasks where memorization is helping you. And in the red area, I'm showing you tasks where memorization hinders you. And now I'm going to order the tasks by the difficulty. And you can really see the more complex the task gets, the less effective is memorization as a learning structure. And the world is moving in that direction. The things that are easy to teach, easy to test, these ones are disappearing, those ones are increasing. So memorization is always, for some tasks, good, but in general, helping you less and less. Control strategies. This is where Lithuania is not doing so well, but sort of still in the middle. What do I mean by this? This is the capacity of students to manage their own learning, to set learning goals, to monitor learning, things that you can actually teach quite well by giving students more responsibility for their own learning, to give students more control over the time, the pace, quality of their learning. And you can see actually it matters hugely. Most of the PISA tasks can be better solved by students who have those kinds of control strategies. So Lithuania would come out better on PISA if students would have better control strategies. But if you look at this careful, you can see actually at the most complex PISA task, it doesn't help you either. So you need to actually look at the last part of this, and that's about elaboration strategies, helping students to connect what they know with the new world, and so on, building kind of connections. And there you can see actually, that's the predictor for the kind of most complex tasks. So having teachers who master a complex range of learning strategies, who are able and capable of to engage students who learn differently. What's also important, some people say, well, the answer to education is all about project-based, collaborative learning. No? Well, it's a big part of the answer of tomorrow's learning, particularly at this end of the spectrum. Those kinds of approaches to teaching, student-oriented learning, teaching, and so on, is very important. But actually, what you can see for most simple tasks, that's not working really well. If you use project-based learning to teach students the multiplication tables, you're going to waste a lot of time of a lot of people, and you don't get very good results. So the answer really is to have teachers who are capable to embrace a diversity of pedagogical approaches. That's what success is really about. Well, I leave you with this. I talked about the simple things, about money, and how we actually make sure that resources need the students most in need. That's the kind of thing that matters. How do we prioritize the quality of teaching over things like, class size and so on? I think so. An area where Lithuania has still a long way to go, and it's really difficult because you touch on things that are very, very hard to do. Consolidating schools, easy to say, really, really hard to do. But they're going to be important. Tomorrow's quality of teaching will very much depend on those kinds of issues. But the third part, making teaching intellectually more attractive, giving teachers more interesting careers, more opportunities for professional collaboration, to combine a high degree of professional autonomy with a collaborative culture is very hard. And the last point, changing instructional practice. This is not the intended curriculum, the things that we write down. This is about the implemented curriculum, what is actually happening in the classroom. Again, if you have a high school exit exam that is very much focused on specific knowledge, it's going to be very hard to change the behavior of teachers in those kinds of directions. Lots of things to do, but at the same time, I put up lots of challenges to you. But you look at the last 10 years of Lithuania, enormous progress in raising quality and equity in education. So I have every reason to believe that Lithuania is ready to meet those challenges. Thank you very much.